Moments ago, tension rippled through the palace halls as an unexpected incident involving Princess Charlotte left everyone stunned. What began as a quiet interaction quickly became something far more serious. When Prince William realized what had happened, the shift was instant. Calm gave way to fury, and the atmosphere inside the palace changed completely. Conversations stopped, smiles disappeared, and a line that should never have been crossed suddenly was. What sparked this confrontation? Why did it strike so deeply at William's core as a father and heir? Stay with us as the truth behind this explosive moment unfolds. The tradition that welcomed new beginnings. January 1st, 2026 dawned over Sandringham Estate with the kind of sharp, luminous cold that felt like an unspoken promise. Frost glittered across the manicured lawns, and thin winter sunlight slipped through ancient trees that had borne witness to countless royal moments. Inside the main house, staff moved with quiet precision, offered a rare pause. It was a moment to breathe after the holiday rush, and to look ahead with measured hope. For King Charles, hosting his second New Year's Day as monarch carried its own gravity. The previous year had been about adjustment, finding a rhythm that honored legacy while allowing space for his own approach to family life. This year felt distinct. There was a carefully earned optimism in the air. The year 2025 had tested them profoundly, both publicly and behind closed doors. Catherine's health crisis had defined much of it, her cancer diagnosis and treatment touching every corner of the family. Her presence today, visibly recovering, felt like a blessing none of them overlooked. Camilla embraced her role as hostess with purpose, overseeing details throughout the morning. She adjusted flowers, checked table settings, and ensured each room felt welcoming rather than imposing. These gatherings mattered to her. They were her chance to reinforce unity, to show she understood the delicate line royal life walked between formality and warmth. Today needed to feel perfect, a reminder that hardship had not diminished their bond. William and Catherine arrived shortly before noon, the Range Rover rolling along the gravel drive as George, Charlotte, and Louis peered out with excitement. William helped Catherine from the car with instinctive care, a reflection of how fiercely he still guarded her well-being. She looked stronger now than in the hardest months, but his protectiveness had only deepened, extending to their children and the fragile calm they had rebuilt. Charlotte, now 9, leapt from the car carrying a neatly wrapped folder she had labored over for weeks. Her mother's illness had shaped her quietly, inspiring a determination to bring happiness and pride to family moments. Today, she was certain her project would do just that. Inside, the atmosphere matched Charles's hopes. Warm, relaxed, and free of the intensity that lingered after Christmas. Princess Anne arrived with brisk affection, greeting Catherine with an appraising look before nodding approval. Recovery suited her. Color and light had returned. Lunch passed comfortably in the smaller dining room Charles favored. Conversation stayed light. George spoke earnestly about his studies. Louis delighted everyone with candid observations, and Charlotte watched patiently, waiting. As coffee followed and the family gathered in the drawing room, winter light filled the space, and the fire murmured softly. This was Charlotte's moment. She reached for her folder as William and Catherine exchanged knowing smiles. As she began to open it, anticipation filled the room. The afternoon still held promise. No one there, not even Anne with her sharp awareness, expected how quickly that warmth would vanish. No one foresaw that words spoken by Camilla, perhaps without full recognition of their weight, would spark a confrontation long simmering beneath the surface. Unforeseen judgment. Charlotte's project, carefully arranged on the low table before her family, reflected weeks of focused dedication. She had assembled an in-depth research presentation on marine biology, complete with hand-drawn illustrations of ocean ecosystems, neatly typed facts about coral reef conservation, and photographs she herself had taken during the family's summer holiday in Scotland, capturing coastal wildlife. For a 9-year-old, the work showed striking concentration and authentic curiosity. This was not a school task completed out of duty. It was a personal pursuit, sparked by a documentary she had watched with her mother during one of Catherine's better days amid treatment. As Charlotte explained her work, her voice growing steadier with each point, William felt a quiet swell of pride. This curiosity, this self-directed passion pursued with care, was exactly what he and Catherine hoped to cultivate in their children. George leaned forward, engaged, asking thoughtful questions that showed real interest. Louis, younger and more easily distracted, still watched with the admiration younger siblings reserve for moments of genuine achievement. Catherine's eyes shone, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Watching her daughter flourish after months when normalcy felt painfully fragile was deeply moving. She squeezed William's hand, the silent language they shared now instinctive. Look what we still have. Look what we nearly lost. Look what matters. Charles smiled and asked Charlotte to expand on one of her diagrams about tidal ecosystems. He had always encouraged his grandchildren's interests, whatever shape they took. Anne, standing near the fireplace with her teacup, nodded approvingly. Thoroughness mattered to her, and Charlotte's work embodied it. Then Camilla spoke, and the atmosphere shifted in a way that was gentle at first, yet unmistakable to those attuned to the room. Her remark began mildly, noting the detail of Charlotte's work and the effort it must have required. But then came the turn, where observation edged into judgment. Her phrasing implied, without direct criticism, that perhaps Charlotte's time might have been better invested in pursuits more traditionally aligned with young princesses. Music, languages, the refined accomplishments long associated with royal girlhood. Charlotte's animated expression faltered. Confusion crossed her face as she tried to decide whether she was being praised or corrected. The uncertainty in her eyes struck William sharply. He stayed still, but Catherine knew him well enough to sense the tension that suddenly set in his shoulders. His hand tightened slightly around hers. Anne set down her teacup with deliberate care, a subtle signal that she too had heard the undertone. Camilla, seemingly unaware of the effect, continued. She spoke of the importance of traditional skills, of how royal girls through history had cultivated certain refined interests. Her tone was not harsh. Nothing she said was overtly critical, yet the implication was clear enough. Marine biology, rooted in science and conservation, was somehow less fitting than the pursuits Camilla's generation had valued. Charlotte's enthusiasm began to fade. She lowered her gaze to her pages, and William watched his daughter's confidence ebb away. This child, who had endured months of uncertainty during her mother's illness and had channeled anxiety into learning, was now being told, however indirectly, that her passion was misplaced. Catherine shifted closer to Charlotte, her protective instinct immediate. She stopped herself from speaking, knowing William's response would be decisive. This was his family, his father's wife, and the dynamics reached far beyond this single exchange. William's jaw tightened, a sign those close to him recognized instantly. George glanced at his father, sensing the change. Louis, absorbed in a small toy, remained unaware. Anne stepped in with practiced diplomacy, commenting on the growing importance of scientific understanding and conservation as meaningful areas of modern royal engagement. Her words supported Charlotte without openly contradicting Camilla, a lifeline offered to redirect the moment. Charles followed with praise of Charlotte's dedication and effort, attempting his own gentle correction. But it felt insufficient, arriving after the wound had already been made. Camilla appeared genuinely taken aback by the reaction. She believed she had offered guidance, sharing insight shaped by decades within royal life. She had not meant to hurt Charlotte or offend her parents, but intention and impact rarely align, particularly in families shaped by history, expectation, and unresolved tension. The room hung in a fragile pause, everyone aware something had shifted, unsure how permanent the damage might be. Then William stood. His movements were controlled, but his resolve unmistakable. When he spoke, his voice was low, firm, and clear. He asked Camilla for a private word, not later, not after emotions cooled, now. the moment a mother's heart fractures. What followed would later be described in hushed tones by the few staff members in attendance, discussed obliquely by senior advisors, and felt as a profound rupture by everyone gathered in that drawing room. Because what Camilla said next, whether rooted in genuine concern or unexamined bias, sliced through the warmth of the afternoon like a cold draft through an open window. Her third remark, offered after Anne's careful intervention and Charles's gentle attempt to steer the conversation away, carried a gravity her earlier comments had only suggested. With the assurance that comes from decades operating inside inflexible systems, Camilla suggested that Charlotte's interest in marine biology and environmental science, though admirable in theory, risked distracting her from what she described as the more essential skills a young princess ought to develop. The implication landed with painful clarity. Science was unsuitable for someone in Charlotte's position. Conservation, despite its central place in King Charles's own legacy, was somehow inappropriate when embraced by his 9-year-old granddaughter. But it was the comparison that followed that shifted the moment from uneasy to unforgivable. Camilla spoke approvingly of how royal girls in earlier generations had devoted themselves to music, needlework, languages, and polished social graces, skills designed to prepare them for ornamental roles rather than meaningful contribution, accomplishments that kept royal women carefully confined while their brothers and male cousins engaged with the wider world. The words settled heavily in the room, condemning not only Charlotte's interests, but everything William and Catherine had deliberately built for their children. A childhood shaped by curiosity rather than conformity. An education that rewarded passion over protocol. A future in which their daughter could be as intellectually engaged and professionally consequential as her brothers, guided by her own choices rather than outdated expectations of gender and royal decorum. Charlotte's expression, already marked by confusion, now shifted to something far worse. Hurt, the distinct pain that comes when a trusted adult, someone whose approval matters, suggests that the part of you that feels most alive is actually a flaw needing correction. Her bright eyes filled with tears she was too proud and too carefully taught to release in public. She turned instinctively toward her mother, searching for reassurance, for refuge from words she could not fully parse but felt deeply. Catherine's response was instant and visceral. She moved toward Charlotte with the fierce protectiveness of a mother who had spent the last year fighting simply to remain present for moments like this, to shield her children from precisely this kind of diminishment. Her hand rested on Charlotte's shoulder, a gesture of quiet affirmation. Whatever Camilla's words implied, Catherine's touch answered clearly. You are whole. Your interests matter. Your passion is strength. William's reaction was impossible to overlook. His body stiffened, his hands curled tightly at his sides, his jaw clenched with such intensity that Anne, observing from across the room, felt a brief flash of concern. She had seen William manage anger and frustration with disciplined restraint. This was different. This was a father witnessing his daughter being wounded by someone who should have known better. Someone who had just challenged his parenting and his vision for his children's futures. George sensed enough to know something had gone terribly wrong. He reached for Charlotte's hand, a quiet act of solidarity that would have been sweet in another context, but now felt heartbreakingly necessary. Louis, finally aware of the shift, stopped playing and looked around with wide, uncertain eyes. Anne's expression hardened from polite concern to icy fury. She had spent a lifetime watching women's potential minimized, girls guided toward decorative paths at the expense of substance. She had resisted those constraints quietly but persistently, believing the mistakes of her generation would not be repeated. Hearing Camilla echo the very philosophy Anne had fought against felt like a betrayal of Charlotte and of every woman constrained by tradition. Charles understood immediately that the moment had crossed into dangerous territory. His wife had criticized his son's parenting publicly, diminished his granddaughter's intelligence, and invoked a model of royal femininity He himself had struggled to modernize. The staff present, discreet but attentive, recognized the gravity of what they were witnessing. Disagreements were common. This was something else. With a child at its center and the monarchy's values at stake, the tension was unmistakable. Camilla, finally sensing the damage, attempted to clarify. But clarification built on the same foundation only deepened the wound. She spoke of tradition, preparation, and time-tested methods. Each word confirmed what William already knew. The moment crystallized into a single, unavoidable truth. This was not a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with diplomacy. This was a fundamental clash of values, a collision between the monarchy Camilla had learned to navigate and the monarchy William was determined to create. And his daughter had just become collateral damage in that larger battle. The confrontation that stripped away pretense. Charles reacted first, guided by instincts shaped through decades of managing family rifts. He suggested gently that everyone pause, that heated moments rarely produced clarity, that perhaps after tea and some reflection, any concerns could be addressed more constructively. It was the language of a monarch practiced in de-escalation, in buying time until emotions softened and reason could re-enter the room. William was unmoved. Cooling off was not an option. Reflection could wait. His daughter had just been told, before her brothers and her mother still recovering from illness, that her curiosity and intellect were somehow inappropriate for a girl of her position. He would not allow such a message to linger unchallenged beneath a veneer of politeness. His insistence that the conversation happen immediately carried unmistakable authority. Charles recognized it at once. This was not a son seeking approval. This was the future king drawing a line. The edge in William's voice made clear that further delay would only intensify the conflict. Catherine understood instantly. With quiet efficiency, she gathered their children. She bent to Charlotte, murmuring words meant only for her, before guiding all three toward a smaller sitting room, away from what was about to unfold. George hesitated, looking back at his father. Charlotte walked stiffly, her earlier excitement extinguished. Louis, unsettled but compliant, clung to Catherine's hand. As Catherine passed William, their eyes met briefly. Nothing was said, yet everything was understood. She stood with him completely. Whatever he needed to say, however far he needed to go to protect their daughter, she supported him without reservation. Her own anger, though quieter, burned just as fiercely. She had fought to survive for her children and would not watch her daughter diminished by anyone, title notwithstanding. Anne chose to remain. She positioned herself near the fireplace, her presence deliberate and immovable. Neither Charles nor William objected. In moments like this, Anne served as witness and anchor. Her allegiance was to the institution, but her sympathy was clearly with William. When the door closed behind Catherine and the children, the drawing room felt tighter, the winter light exposing a scene free of ceremony. Camilla stood near the sofa, beside the scattered pages of Charlotte's marine biology project, a silent reminder of what had ignited the confrontation. William's fury, restrained until now, sharpened his words. His voice stayed low, but its intensity was unmistakable. He began simply, "That is my daughter." The words carried ownership, duty, and an unbreakable boundary. He proceeded carefully, laying out expectations that were not suggestions. No one had the right to criticize his children's interests, to suggest their passions were misplaced, or to impose antiquated ideas of what royal girls should pursue. His children would be raised curious, engaged, and unbound by the gender limitations that had constrained earlier generations. Camilla responded defensively, framing her remarks as concern. She spoke of pressures, of scrutiny faced by royal women, of her own hard-earned survival within a judgmental system. Preparing Charlotte, she insisted, meant teaching her which interests would be accepted and which might invite criticism. William rejected this outright. He challenged the idea that safety came from limitation. His children would not be taught to shrink themselves to avoid judgment. They would not learn that gender dictated intellectual boundaries, scientific curiosity, especially the kind his father had championed his entire life, was not inappropriate for his daughter. The dispute extended beyond Charlotte's project. It was a clash of philosophies. Camilla's worldview emphasized survival through adaptation, respecting rules that could not be broken. William's vision was shaped by witnessing his mother's suffering, by Catherine's brush with death, and by his determination that his children would not inherit the emotional sacrifices he had endured. Charles watched, torn. He faced two visions of royal life, both rooted in love yet fundamentally opposed. Tradition versus transformation. Containment versus empowerment. William's final argument cut deepest. He referenced the year they had endured, the months defined by Catherine's illness. Charlotte's research had been more than a hobby. It had been a lifeline. Camilla's dismissal, unintended or not, had struck at something that helped his daughter survive fear and uncertainty. Anne finally spoke, her words brief and unforgiving. Charlotte's interests were admirable, and any perspective that dismissed them had no place in the monarchy William would inherit. Camilla appeared shaken, though it remained unclear whether it was remorse or shock at William's resolve. William concluded with unmistakable finality. Decisions about his children belonged to him and Catherine alone. Camilla could be a grandmother, but not an authority over their upbringing. The line had been drawn, and everyone in that room understood it would not be easily crossed again. The history that made this moment unavoidable. What unfolded in Sandringham's drawing room on New Year's Day did not arise in isolation. It was the outcome of tensions that had accumulated quietly over many years. Disagreements carefully avoided, irritations politely masked, and expectations left unspoken but deeply felt. Like layers of sediment settling unnoticed, these unresolved differences had been building long before Camilla's remarks about Charlotte's marine biology project brought everything into sharp and public focus. The core divide between William and Camilla over how royal children should be raised could be traced back to George's earliest years. Even then, as William and Catherine navigated the pressures of first-time parenthood under constant scrutiny, Camilla offered advice shaped by her own generation's values. She suggested the children appear less often in public. She recommended that George's education emphasize tradition and protocol sooner than William felt was healthy. She spoke repeatedly about maintaining distance between the children and ordinary childhood experiences. William generally met these suggestions with polite dismissal, choosing not to confront Camilla directly or challenge her place in offering opinions. Catherine, however, noticed every instance. She registered how often Camilla's guidance leaned toward restraint, conformity, and containment. Having grown up outside royal confines, Catherine carried a visceral appreciation for normal life and was determined her children would retain as much of it as possible. Suggestions that normalcy was risky or inappropriate unsettled her deeply and stirred a quiet but enduring resentment. Charlotte's birth intensified those tensions. Camilla's perspective on raising a royal daughter carried assumptions that troubled both parents. There was an emphasis on appearance, on grace and diplomacy over substance and engagement. Remarks implied that Charlotte's upbringing should differ from George's, not because of personality or interest, but because of expectations rooted in gender. To William and Catherine, those ideas belonged to a past they had no intention of repeating. Anne observed these patterns with increasing unease. She recognized in Camilla's views the same constraints that had shaped her own childhood, the same assumptions that once limited her opportunities. Anne had fought persistently for meaningful work beyond ceremonial duty, and she hoped that struggle would spare the next generation. Watching Camilla revive principles Anne had spent her life resisting felt deeply concerning. Catherine's illness brought these underlying conflicts into even sharper relief. During the long, frightening months when cancer treatment dominated family life, Camilla made comments that revealed a disconnect from what William and Catherine were enduring. She suggested more than once that the children be shielded completely from their mother's illness, perhaps sent away during the hardest periods, protected from the reality of the situation. William rejected this without hesitation. He and Catherine had chosen honesty balanced with age-appropriate care. They believed their children should know the truth, that their mother was ill but fighting, and that facing hardship together mattered more than maintaining appearances. Camilla's proposals, though possibly well-meant, felt like yet another attempt to prioritize image over authentic connection. Yet beneath all of this lay a deeper tension that was more difficult to name. William had never fully accepted Camilla's understanding of royal duty. While the history involving his mother lingered, the issue went beyond that. Camilla had secured her place through patience, conformity, and endurance within the system. William acknowledged the difficulty of that path, but rejected its implications for his children. He did not want them taught to survive the institution as it was. He wanted the institution itself to change. Charles, positioned perpetually between wife and son, had tried repeatedly to bridge this divide. He understood both viewpoints. He had lived Camilla's approach and seen how adaptation eventually brought acceptance. At the same time, he shared William's belief that the monarchy needed to evolve. Holding space for both perspectives, however, did not resolve the reality that they were fundamentally incompatible. Built facade finally gave way. The exit from Sandringham came far sooner than anyone had anticipated, the meticulously planned afternoon unraveling into a hurried departure that staff moved quickly to manage, while carefully averting their eyes from the tension hanging in the air. William's expression was unreadable as he gathered his family, his actions precise but edged with unmistakable resolve. Catherine, pale yet steady, devoted her full attention to the children, especially Charlotte, whose earlier excitement had faded into a quiet, bewildered sadness that pierced her mother deeply. The short drive back to Anmer Hall, their secluded home on the Sandringham grounds, lasted less than 15 minutes, but felt much longer. George sat in silence, old enough to sense the seriousness of what had happened, but uncertain whether questions would help or harm. Louis, overwhelmed by emotions he could not fully grasp, drifted to sleep against Catherine's shoulder. Charlotte stared through the window at the frozen countryside, clutching her marine biology folder tightly. As if it were something precious, she feared losing. At home, William and Catherine instinctively created a protective cocoon. They gathered in the informal sitting room, the place where their family felt most real, free from ceremony and expectation. Catherine settled beside Charlotte on the sofa, and what followed was a private conversation that would never be shared in detail, but would stay with Charlotte for the rest of her life. They reassured her, using language suited to her 9-year-old understanding, that her interests mattered, that curiosity about science, conservation, and the natural world was not just acceptable, but something to be proud of, that no one, regardless of title or authority, had the right to tell her that what she loved was wrong. As Catherine spoke, William watched his daughter's face and felt his anger toward Camilla shift into something heavier. The anger remained, but it was joined by sadness. Sadness that in 2026, his daughter still needed reassurance that intelligence was not a flaw. Sadness that the institution he would one day lead still carried assumptions that limited girls simply because they were girls. Meanwhile, back at the main house, Charles and Camilla confronted their own reckoning. After spending an hour alone in his study, Charles joined Camilla as evening settled in. Their discussion was difficult in ways their marriage had rarely tested. Charles could not defend her remarks, gently explaining that the world had changed, and that their grandchildren would inhabit a monarchy neither of them could fully predict. Camilla tried to explain herself. She had not meant to hurt Charlotte. She believed she was offering protection, shaped by the criticism she herself had endured. But Charles helped her see what William had meant. Limiting a child was not protection. Teaching Charlotte to shrink would not spare her judgment. It would only rob her of confidence when judgment inevitably came. Anne, still at Sandringham, later offered Charles her characteristically blunt view. She told him Camilla had been wrong, William had been justified, and that if the family could not accept that Charlotte's generation would define royal duty differently, then perhaps the monarchy did not deserve to continue at all.